Lady Louise Windsor had spent years mastering one of the monarchy's oldest survival skills: complete, unyielding silence. She rarely stepped into public controversy, never competed for media attention, and guarded her feelings about Queen Elizabeth with almost sacred privacy. But that silence just shattered into a million sharp pieces when Louise delivered one devastating, 14-word sentence directly to Camilla. Words so deeply personal, so cutting, and so impossible to soften that even those standing nearest her in the private quarters of Windsor Castle seemed utterly frozen, completely unsure of how to react. Before we dive deep into the chaotic, unscripted fallout that is currently sending shockwaves through the royal corridors, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss another exclusive update. Louise stood inside a quiet private reception following a commemorate event dedicated to Queen Elizabeth's enduring legacy. Her parents, Edward and Sophie, were standing just steps away. Charles and Camilla were present, alongside several senior royals who had stayed behind for what was supposed to be a calm, unified family gathering. But instead of quiet reflection, the room was instantly paralyzed. During a tense exchange about the younger royals publicly embracing Camilla's elevated position as queen, Louise looked Camilla dead in the eye and delivered a line that will go down in palace history. "Camilla will never take Queen Elizabeth's place in my heart." The room went dead silent. No anger, no screaming, just pure lethal clarity that left Camilla speechless and the entire royal hierarchy in absolute shambles. The tension inside that private Windsor reception did not simply evaporate after Lady Louise spoke. It condensed into a suffocating pressure that seemed to alter the very air in the room. To truly understand why those 14 quiet words felt like a seismic detonation within the royal family, one has to look at the explosive chain of events leading up to that fateful afternoon. For months, quiet leaks from deep within Clarence House and Buckingham Palace hinted at a subtle, yet aggressive campaign orchestrated by senior image strategists. The objective was simple: calculate a seamless public transition that would solidify Camilla's standing as the undeniable matriarch of the firm. But in their rush to construct an image of absolute generation-spanning unity, those strategists overlooked the silent resilience of Queen Elizabeth's favorite granddaughter. Anonymous palace insiders have recently come forward, alleging that behind closed doors, a series of calculated maneuvers had been taking place to quietly phase out visible tokens of the late Queen's personal legacy, in favor of a modernized, streamlined aesthetic centered entirely around Charles and Camilla. The tipping point occurred during the meticulous planning of a high-profile commemorative display, designed to showcase the unbroken continuity of the British monarchy. Documents surreptitiously leaked from within the royal household reveal that original layout designs, which prominently featured iconic, historic portraits of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip surrounded by their grandchildren, were abruptly altered. Insiders claim the revised floor plans, quietly pushed through by high-ranking communications officers eager to curry favor with the current reign, relegated the late monarch's image to the background while positioning Charles and Camilla front and center. Younger family members, including Lady Louise, were explicitly instructed by protocol coordinators to line up directly beside Camilla, creating a visually striking tableau meant to signal to the world that the younger generation had fully, enthusiastically embraced the new order. To the public, it would have looked like a touching moment of family solidarity. To Louise, who had spent her entire childhood forming an unshakable bond with her grandmother over quiet afternoons at Balmoral and shared carriage driving sessions at Windsor, it was a cynical attempt to rewrite history. When Louise arrived at the venue hours before the official gathering, she noticed the altered arrangements almost immediately. Eyewitnesses describe a moment of stark, unspoken confrontation when Louise politely asked a senior aide if the original portrait of her grandparents could be returned to its prominent position before the press photographers arrived. The aide, caught completely off guard by the usually reserved young royal, stammered that the layout had already received high-level approval and could not be altered. What the aide did not realize was that Camilla herself had stepped into the room just in time to hear the exchange. Rather than defusing the tension, Camilla allegedly remarked that the presentation was designed to look forward, not backward, emphasizing that the modern monarchy required a clear, focused image for the future. For Camilla, it was a matter of strategic messaging and executive brand management. For Louise, those words sounded like a cold, calculated instruction to pack away her grief and fall in line for the sake of palace public relations. The backlash within the immediate family was instantaneous, even if it was initially kept behind closed doors. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, who has long been regarded as one of the most grounded and fiercely protective figures within the royal family, immediately stepped in when she saw her daughter's visible distress. Reports indicate that Sophie confronted the event coordinators in a heated, low-voiced exchange, demanding to know who had authorized symbolic staging that inflicted such obvious emotional pain on a grieving granddaughter. When it became clear that the directives had come from the very top of the palace hierarchy, the atmosphere turned toxic. Louise did not cause a scene in front of the assembled cameras that day, but her quiet protest spoke volumes. Seconds before the official photographs were taken, she subtly shifted her position, stepping away from Camilla's side to stand firmly next to her father, Prince Edward. It was a minor movement on camera, easily missed by the casual observer, but to those inside the palace machinery, it was an unmistakable line drawn in the sand. The fallout from that photographic maneuver set off a secret, high-stakes internal crisis that palace officials desperately tried to contain. In the weeks that followed, rumors swirled through the palace corridors that Charles was privately furious, not at Louise, but at the sheer incompetence of his media team for allowing a simple commemorative display to turn into a battleground of personal loyalties. The king, caught between his desire to present a strong, united front alongside his wife and his deep, enduring affection for his niece, ordered an immediate internal review of all upcoming event staging. But the damage had already been done. Camilla felt publicly slighted by Louise's subtle repositioning, viewing it as a silent rebellion that threatened to undermine her carefully cultivated authority. Meanwhile, Louise felt increasingly cornered, as if every royal engagement was becoming a loyalty test where honoring the memory of Queen Elizabeth was quietly framed as a subtle act of disrespect toward the current reign. As the date of the private Windsor family reception approached, the atmosphere behind palace walls had reached a boiling point. Senior aides, terrified of another public misstep, attempted to smooth things over by circulating internal briefing notes that urged all family members to project warmth and emotional equivalence toward Camilla during the upcoming gathering. It was the ultimate miscalculation. Trying to mandate personal affection through administrative memos only deepened the divide, transforming what should have been a quiet moment of family remembrance into a pressure cooker of unspoken resentment. Louise carried the weight of that escalating pressure for days, confiding in her mother that she felt as though the institution was trying to force her to trade her genuine memories for scripted loyalty. By the time the family gathered in that private room at Windsor, surrounded by historic portraits and the heavy weight of centuries of tradition, the stage was set for an unprecedented explosion. The reception started with the usual polite, practiced small talk that defines high society royal gatherings, but the underlying tension was palpable to everyone present. Charles moved through the room attempting to maintain a relaxed demeanor, while Edward and Sophie stayed close to their daughter, offering silent support. Camilla, clearly sensing the lingering distance, eventually approached the group, hoping to finalize what she likely believed would be a routine reconciliation. But when the conversation turned to the younger royals' role in supporting the new reign, the subtle friction burst into the open. Camilla gently pressed the issue, suggesting that unity meant standing together without dwelling on past arrangements. That was the moment the dam broke. Louise, who had spent her entire life staying out of the spotlight and avoiding conflict at all costs, looked directly at the Queen and delivered the 14 words that would freeze the blood of every senior royal in the room, asserting with absolute, devastating clarity that Camilla would never take Queen Elizabeth's place in her heart. The immediate reaction was pure, unadulterated shock. The room, previously filled with the soft clinking of teacups and hushed conversation, plunged into an agonizing heavy silence where nobody dared to breathe. Camilla's expression instantly tightened, her eyes flashing with a mixture of disbelief and deep-seated offense as she turned her gaze toward Charles, expecting the king to step in and restore order. But Charles remained completely frozen, torn between his duty as sovereign and his role as an uncle who knew precisely how much Queen Elizabeth had meant to young Louise. Edward instinctively took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of his daughter, not to scold her, but to shield her from the immediate emotional blast radius of what she had just said. Sophie showed no surprise at all. As a trusted confidant who had watched her daughter struggle with grief under the harsh glare of public expectations, she had repeatedly warned palace officials that pushing emotional equivalence would eventually trigger a massive disaster. Camilla, recovering her composure through sheer force of will, demanded to know why Louise felt the need to utter such a direct, hurtful statement inside a private family gathering. She argued that she had spent years working tirelessly for the monarchy, carrying out hundreds of engagements, and supporting Charles through the most turbulent transition in modern royal history, only to be subjected to what felt like a public rejection from within the inner circle. But Louise did not retreat, nor did her voice tremble as she held her ground against the most powerful woman in the British Empire. She calmly reminded Camilla that the problem had not started in that room, but weeks earlier, when advisors acting in Camilla's name had attempted to rearrange family history for the sake of a polished photo opportunity. Louise made it crystal clear that while she respected the crown, the title, and the constitutional reality of the new reign, personal love and cherished memories were not assets that could be transferred by royal decree or managed by a public relations department. The confrontation quickly escalated beyond a simple disagreement over family etiquette and metastasized into a full-blown constitutional and emotional crisis for the royal household. Charles, realizing that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, abruptly called an end to the open discussion and summoned his top private secretaries and communications directors to an emergency late-night briefing. Leaked accounts from that secret meeting reveal a monarch pushed to his absolute limit, slamming his glasses onto the mahogany table, as he demanded to know how his media strategy had managed to alienate his own family. Charles was furious that his staff had pushed such an aggressive visual campaign without considering the personal grief still felt by the younger royals. He demanded an immediate explanation as to why Louise's prior objections regarding the commemorative display had been brushed aside by overzealous aides who were more concerned with trending headlines than the internal stability of the royal family. As news of the explosive exchange began to circulate among the ultra-exclusive inner circles of the royal household, the palace PR machinery went into absolute overdrive trying to contain the story. Senior advisors were terrified that if the public caught wind of Louise's devastating 14-word rebuke, it would utterly shatter the carefully crafted image of a smooth, harmonious transition that they had spent billions of tax dollars and years of media manipulation to build. Emergency gag orders were quietly issued to household staff, and draft press releases regarding upcoming family engagements were frantically rewritten to erase any language that implied the younger royals were actively championing Camilla's personal standing. But despite their desperate efforts to lock down the palace, the truth was already leaking through the cracks, revealing a royal family deeply divided between the harsh demands of modern image management and the sacred, unbreakable bonds of personal memory. The internal investigation ordered by Charles quickly unraveled a web of micromanagement and strategic overreach that went far deeper than a single misplaced photograph. It turned out that image advisors had been quietly developing a multi-year strategy aimed at gradually rebranding major royal heritage sites, shifting the visual narrative away from the 70-year reign of Queen Elizabeth and establishing Charles and Camilla as the definitive central figures of modern British history. This secret strategy involved everything from altering historical display layouts in royal residences to subtly directing event photographers on how to frame family shots, so that younger royals appeared emotionally dependent on the new queen. When Charles was confronted with the full extent of these covert media tactics, he realized that his own authority had been weaponized by aides who viewed family emotions as nothing more than raw material for clever public relations campaigns. While the palace officials scrambled to assess the collateral damage, the emotional breach between Louise and Camilla remained wide open, threatening to turn every upcoming public appearance into a media nightmare. Camilla, deeply hurt by the accusation that she was trying to erase the late queen's legacy, retreated to her private quarters, refusing to attend scheduled briefing sessions with communications staff. She argued to close confidants that she had never asked to replace Elizabeth in anyone's heart, but that she could not perform her duties as queen if members of her own family were actively casting her as a cold, calculating usurper of cherished memories. The narrative had become toxic, threatening to erase years of painstaking work, aimed at securing public acceptance for her role, and leaving her feeling completely isolated within the very palace she was supposed to help rule. For Sophie and Edward, the crisis represented a definitive breaking point with the palace establishment. They made it abundantly clear to Charles that they would no longer allow their daughter to be subjected to subtle emotional coercion, or used as a passive prop to bolster the popularity of the modern throne. In a tense, private meeting with the king, Edward reportedly stated that if the palace media machine continued to push Louise into uncomfortable symbolic positions, his family would completely withdraw from high-profile public engagements, choosing instead to live quiet, private lives away from the toxic environment of the court. This was no empty threat. The loss of Edward, Sophie, and Louise, who are widely regarded by the British public as some of the most dedicated, scandal-free members of the firm, would deal a devastating blow to the monarchy's public image at a time when its popularity was already on razor-thin ice. Faced with the imminent collapse of family unity, and the threat of a public scandal that could destroy his reign before it even fully established itself, Charles took a drastic, unprecedented step that sent shockwaves through the royal household. Overriding the strenuous objections of his top communications advisors, the king issued a strict, binding directive prohibiting any staff member from attempting to dictate the positioning, emotional framing, or symbolic roles of younger family members during official events. He explicitly ordered that all future commemorations honoring Queen Elizabeth be managed with absolute respect for personal grief, declaring that personal affection could never be mandated or manufactured for the benefit of public relations. It was a massive, humiliating defeat for the palace strategists, and a stunning, quiet victory for Lady Louise, who had proven that even the vast, intimidating power of the royal PR machine could not bend her personal integrity. However, the directive alone could not heal the deep, burning personal resentment that lingered between Camilla and Louise in the wake of their fierce confrontation. The silence between them grew so dense that even routine family communications had to be routed through third parties, creating an absurd, deeply uncomfortable dynamic inside the royal residences. Palace staffers described walking on eggshells whenever both women were scheduled to be in the same building, terrified that a single wrong word or misplaced gesture could ignite another catastrophic argument. Camilla knew that as long as this open wound remained unaddressed, her standing within the family would remain forever compromised, haunted by the ghost of the late queen and the unyielding defiance of a young woman who refused to stay silent, driven by a desperate need to resolve the crisis before it leaked to the global press and permanently ruined her legacy. Camilla took a massive, uncharacteristic gamble that shocked everyone in the royal household. She bypassed her advisors, ignored standard palace protocol, and personally requested a private, one-on-one meeting with Lady Louise. There would be no private secretaries present, no press officers monitoring the conversation, no Charles to mediate, and no Sophie to protect her daughter. It was an all-or-nothing move designed to strip away the grand titles, the aggressive PR strategies, and the intimidating machinery of the state, leaving just two women standing face-to-face in a quiet room at Windsor Castle, forced to confront the painful truth of those 14 devastating words once and for all. When Lady Louise walked into the small, secluded sitting room at Windsor for the private meeting, the tension was so thick it was almost physical. She fully expected Camilla to demand a formal apology, to lecture her on the supreme importance of royal protocol, or to pressure her into issuing a softened statement to keep the peace within the family. Louise had mentally prepared herself for a battle, determined not to back down or betray the memory of the grandmother who had meant everything to her. But as she sat down across from the Queen, she noticed something that completely threw her off balance. The aggressive, guarded posture that Camilla usually maintained in public was entirely gone, replaced by an expression of profound, weary vulnerability that revealed just how deeply the controversy had shaken her to the core. Instead of launching into a scripted lecture or issuing a royal command, Camilla did something completely unexpected. She remained silent for a long moment, poured tea for both of them, and then quietly asked Louise to explain, without holding anything back, what the palace's recent actions had truly felt like to her. Caught off guard by the Queen's utter lack of hostility, Louise paused, looked at the woman sitting across from her, and finally spoke from the absolute depths of her soul. She explained that to her, Queen Elizabeth had never been a distant political figure or an icon to be manipulated for public approval. She had been Grandmama, the one steady, safe presence in a world full of terrifying public expectations. Louise described how seeing her grandmother's memory subtly pushed aside for polished photo opportunities felt like an existential threat, as if the family was trying to force her to forget the very person who had given her the confidence to survive inside the royal pressure cooker. Camilla listened to every single word without interrupting, without offering defensive excuses, and without trying to justify the actions of her media team. When Louise finished speaking, the Queen took a deep breath and made a confession that left the young royal speechless. Camilla admitted that she had allowed her own deep-seated insecurities about following in the footsteps of a legendary, 70-year reign to cloud her judgment, blindly trusting advisors who convinced her that visual dominance was necessary for her survival as queen. She confessed that in her desperate, lifelong struggle to win public acceptance and prove her worth to an often hostile nation, she had mistakenly allowed her team to blur the line between being accepted in her constitutional role and demanding the kind of deep, sacred affection that could only ever belong to Queen Elizabeth. In that quiet, unscripted moment, the entire dynamic of the royal war shifted permanently. For the first time, both women saw each other not as political rivals fighting for space within a cold, institutional hierarchy, but as human beings caught in the relentless, unforgiving machinery of the British monarchy. Louise expressed genuine regret that her blunt words had caused deep personal pain, but she firmly stood by her conviction that memory could never be rewritten for convenience. Camilla, in an act of humility that stunned palace insiders who later learned of the meeting, told Louise that she must never apologize for protecting her grief, acknowledging that attempting to force emotional equivalence was a tragic, foolish mistake that should never have happened. To prove that her words were not just empty diplomatic gestures designed to maintain the peace, Camilla reached over to a side table and picked up the very same framed photograph of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip that had sparked the crisis weeks earlier. In a powerful silent gesture that carried more weight than any official palace decree, the Queen set the portrait directly in the center of the table between them, looking at Louise and promising that moving forward, the memory of her grandparents would never again be sidelined or manipulated for the sake of royal PR. She pledged that at all future commemorative events, she would step back, allowing Elizabeth's direct descendants to stand at the forefront of the nation's grief, while she focused solely on her official duties beside King Charles. While this dramatic, emotional breakthrough was occurring behind the heavy, soundproof doors of Windsor Castle, the story outside was taking a terrifying turn that threatened to explode into the global media spotlight. Despite the palace's frantic efforts to enforce absolute secrecy, details of the explosive confrontation had already leaked to high-level media executives and royal correspondents across London. Tabloid newsrooms were working frantically around the clock, cross-referencing anonymous tips from household staff with sudden unexplained shifts in upcoming royal schedules. The sense of impending doom inside the palace press office was overwhelming, as officials realized that it was only a matter of hours before the most explosive royal story of the decade hit the front pages of international newspapers. When the headlines finally broke the next morning, the impact was immediate and devastating. Front pages across the United Kingdom were dominated by dramatic, sensationalized coverage of the internal royal divide, featuring large, striking photographs of Lady Louise alongside bold, shocking quotes about her refusal to accept Camilla as the emotional heir to the throne. Social media platforms exploded with fierce, polarized debates, as millions of people around the world took sides in what was rapidly becoming a massive cultural battle. Royal commentators scrambled to air live broadcasts, analyzing every single word, gesture, and historic parallel, while palace switchboards were flooded with calls from outraged citizens demanding to know the truth behind the heartbreaking narrative. In the chaotic aftermath of the news leak, the palace communications department panicked, desperately drafting an aggressive, formal statement that sought to downplay the crisis, characterized the reports as sensationalized gossip, and forced Lady Louise to issue a public clarification expressing her unwavering support for the Queen. But when the draft statement was brought to King Charles for immediate approval, he rejected it with a fury that terrified his senior advisors. Charles recognized that forcing his niece to issue a fake, sanitized statement would not only destroy her credibility, but would also make the monarchy look utterly terrified of raw, honest human emotion. He ordered the press team to stand down immediately, insisting that the palace would issue no denials, no forced clarifications, and no defensive spin. The king's radical refusal to play the standard palace PR games signaled a massive, permanent transformation in how the royal family managed its internal conflicts. Instead of hiding behind cold, bureaucratic denials or trying to punish Louise for speaking her mind, the monarchy allowed the truth to stand, forcing the public and the media to confront a profound reality: that a historic crown can be inherited through succession, but love,